The distress beacon had been broadcasting for 11 days before anyone acknowledged it. Not because no one heard it. The Covenant relay station at Vega's outer rim picked up the signal within the first 6 hours. The Dominion Fleet Command on Crest Home received the transcript within 12. 3 separate commercial haulers passed within range of the signal on days 4, 5, and 7. They all logged it. They all filed the appropriate documentation. They all kept moving. The ship in distress was a Vethani vessel. And in the current political climate of the Interstellar Covenant, that particular detail changed everything. The Cerethes Meridian was a research cruiser, not a warship. She carried 41 souls, 29 Vethani crew members, 8 research specialists of mixed species, 3 Covenant observers, and 1 individual who did not fit neatly into any category, a juvenile Vethani named Keth, who was 11 years old by Vethani counting, which translated to roughly 14 in the human calendar. He was on the ship because his mother, Chief Science Officer Velan Ross, had nowhere else to leave him when the mission launched unexpectedly from Porthos Station. Keth was not supposed to be here. That was the first thing he had thought when the engine room exploded. He was sitting in the auxiliary observation bubble, a small transparent dome that jutted from the ship's belly like a soap bubble made of glass, drawing in his journal when the sound came. It was not a dramatic sound. It was not a roar or a boom the way explosions sounded in the adventure serials he watched on his data pad. It was a low, wet thump like something heavy dropped into still water, and then the lights went amber and then the ship went very, very quiet. Keth pressed his face against the observation glass and looked out at the stars. They were the same stars they had always been. Indifferent. Burning with the patience of things that had never needed to hurry. "Mom?" he said into the intercom clipped to his collar. Static. Then his mother's voice, clipped and controlled in the way it only got when she was frightened. "Keth, stay where you are. Do not move. I will come to you." She did not come to him for 4 hours. When she did, her face was the color of pale river clay and her left forearm was wrapped in emergency seal foam that had already started to yellow at the edges. "How bad?" he asked. She sat beside him in the observation bubble and looked at the stars for a long moment before answering. That was a Vethani habit, the pause before the truth. His people believed that words spoken too quickly carried the speaker's fear inside them, and fear was contagious. "The primary motivator array is gone," she said. "The backup array was damaged in the same cascade. We have life support, we have communications, we have emergency power. We do not have propulsion. So we're stopped. We are stopped. In deep space. Yes." Keth looked at his journal, still open in his lap, the drawing half finished. He had been sketching the star cluster off the port bow, a loose spray of young blue-white stars that the Vethani called the Sethera Veil. Beautiful and useless like most beautiful things. "Have you sent the distress call?" he asked. 6 hours ago. "Has anyone answered?" Another pause. Longer this time. "Not yet," his mother said. And the way she said it, the weight behind those 2 words, the careful engineering of her tone, told him that not yet was doing a great deal of work. That it was standing in for something heavier and more honest. He was 14. He understood more than she thought he did. "Because we're Vethani," he said. She put her good arm around his shoulders and pulled him close. Her body was warmer than a human's would have been. Vethani ran hot, their biology built for the cold nights of their homeworld, and he pressed into her side and watched the stars and said nothing more. Outside, the Sethera Veil burned on without them. The distress beacon pulsed into the dark. And the dark said nothing back. The Cerethes Meridian had been commissioned 8 years ago as a joint research platform, funded by the Covenant Science Bureau and the Vethani Academic Council. Her mission brief was the study of deep space gravitational anomalies, specifically the slow, strange breathing that certain dead star clusters did, the way they expanded and contracted over centuries in patterns that did not match any known physics model. The Vethani were, above almost everything else, a people of patterns. Their entire civilization had been built on the recognition of cycles: agricultural, astronomical, social, spiritual. Where other species saw chaos, the Vethani saw rhythm. Where others saw randomness, they saw a pattern not yet understood. This was both their greatest intellectual strength and, in the current political moment of the Covenant, their most exploited vulnerability. The war, though no one in the Covenant officially called it a war, they called it the governance realignment, had begun 3 years ago when the Vethani home system of Velsora refused to ratify the Covenant's new resource-sharing treaty. The treaty was, on its surface, reasonable. Equitable distribution of rare mineral rights across 12 systems. Fair contribution to collective defense spending. Standardized trade protocols. What it actually was, beneath the careful legal language, was a slow dismantling of Vethani economic independence. Their home system sat atop the largest known deposit of crestite ore in the explored galaxy, a mineral essential for quantum drive manufacturing. The treaty would have given the Covenant's dominant industrial powers access to that or at prices the Vethani Academic Council described, in their formal rejection letter, as structurally designed to create permanent dependency. The Covenant Council called this characterization inflammatory. They suspended Vethani voting rights pending review. The Vethani withdrew their fleet from joint operations. 3 border skirmishes followed. 47 people died, 20 of them Vethani, 27 of them not. Now, in the frictionless bureaucratic language of the Covenant, the Vethani were a people under administrative review. Their ships were logged and tracked and documented. Their distress calls were received and filed and in 11 days not answered, because answering would be a political statement. And no one in the Covenant wanted to make a political statement about the Vethani that cost them anything. On the morning of the 12th day, Keth was alone in the observation bubble again when the new signal arrived. Not a voice. Not a hail. A light. Far off, 3 million kilometers at least, maybe 4, a single white point brightened against the dark and then began to move. Not the drifting, indifferent movement of a planet or a rock. Purposeful movement. Accelerating movement. Something coming toward them. Keth stared at it for 40 seconds before he pressed the intercom button. Mom. Something's coming. The bridge scrambled. Commander Thes Oral, a thick-necked Vethani male with 20 years of deep space experience and exactly 0 experience with what was about to happen, pulled up the sensor array and went very still. Transponder signature, said Navigation Officer RHE quietly, and then read the code aloud and then stopped. The bridge went silent. Keth had climbed up from the observation bubble and stood in the corridor doorway, too curious to stay where he'd been told. He looked at his mother, who was looking at the commander, who was looking at the display screen with an expression Keth had no word for. Human, said the commander. Why is a human warship responding to us? His mother's eyes found Keth's across the bridge and for a moment, just a moment, something moved across her face that was not quite hope and not quite fear but lived somewhere in the narrow corridor between them. HFY, she murmured very quietly to no one in particular. It was an old Vethani phrase. It had no clean translation into Covenant standard. The closest approximation was something like, now everything changes from this point forward. She was right. She just did not yet know in how many directions. The human warship was called the UES Harrow. She was not a beautiful ship. She was not designed to be. She was a mid-class patrol cruiser, the kind of vessel that existed in the negative space between the glamorous capital ships and the small, nimble scouts. The Harrow was 240 meters of angular gray composite hull, functional and blunt, bristling with sensor arrays and point defense turrets the way a hedgehog bristles with spines. She had been in service for 11 years. She had been in 3 combat engagements, 12 search and rescue operations, and 1 incident that was listed in her official record as a navigational anomaly but which her crew described, in private, as the time Commander Reyes drove them through the interior of a gas giant to avoid a Dominion intercept. Her captain was Commander Isel Reyes, 43 years old. Brown skin, close-cut black hair going silver at the temples, eyes that her crew had, behind her back and affectionately, described as the color of deep water right before a storm rolls in. She had grown up in a coastal city in what used to be Mexico, and she still sometimes dreamed about the ocean when the ship's recycled air got stale enough. She was eating breakfast, Real eggs, a luxury she permitted herself once a week, synthesized but close, when Lieutenant Davi Ocon brought her the distress report. Vethani research cruiser, he said, setting the data pad beside her coffee. Stranded. 11 days. Motivator failure. Reyes read the report without picking up the pad. Then she picked up her coffee. Then she read it again. Who else has received this signal? She asked. Covenant Relay logged it on day 1. 3 commercial haulers passed within response range. Dominion Fleet Command has the full transcript. And no one has moved. No, Commander. She set down her coffee. Looked at the data pad. Looked at the wall. Looked back at the data pad. 41 souls, she said. Yes, Commander. One of them a juvenile. The roster lists a minor, yes. Reyes stood up. Left the eggs. She would not finish them, something that would pain her slightly later when she thought about it because she took waste seriously. But she was already thinking about propulsion mathematics and response vectors and the political paperwork that was going to land on her desk like a collapsed building the moment she diverted course. Plot and intercept course, she said, already moving toward the door. Maximum practical speed. Ocon hesitated. Just for a fraction of a second. But Reyes had spent 11 years learning to read the hesitations of her crew the way a sailor reads the sky. Lieutenant. The Vethani are under Covenant administrative review, Commander. Responding to their distress call without Covenant authorization could be. A human ship has received a valid distress signal from a vessel carrying 41 living people, Reyes said, and her voice was not raised and not angry and not theatrical. It was the voice of someone reading a fact aloud from a document. The Harrow will respond to that signal. That is not a political decision, Lieutenant. That is a maritime law decision. Get me a course. Okon got her a course. The Harrow had a crew of 86. They were not a famous crew. They were not exceptional in the ways that got written about. No brilliant tactical geniuses, no decorated war heroes. What they were was competent and honest and, in the particular way of people who have spent years in close quarters in the void, genuinely concerned about one another. Chief Engineer Priya Vasquez was the one who ran the technical assessment before they reached the Meridian. She pulled the Vethani cruiser's specs from the Covenant database and spent 4 hours in her workspace with cold coffee and a spreading frown. Okay, she said finally to no one in particular. She went to find Commander Reyes. Reyes was on the bridge, watching the growing point of light that was the Meridian on the forward display. The motivator array, Vasquez said without preamble because Reyes preferred that. Vethani design uses a braided field architecture. 3 interlocking motivator coils that operate in sequence, like a relay race, not a single engine. 1 coil pushes, the second catches, the third stabilizes. They lose 1 coil, the other 2 are supposed to compensate. Supposed to, said Reyes. What apparently happened is that a microfracture in the primary coil caused a phase inversion. Instead of handing off cleanly, it sent a backwash of energy through the entire braid. Fried all 3 coils simultaneously. The backup array runs on the same architecture, so same vulnerability. Same result. The backup got hit by a smaller version of the same backwash. It's not completely fried, but it's not functional either. Vasquez paused. The design logic is actually elegant. Under normal operating conditions, the braided system is more efficient than our linear motivator design. Better power distribution, less mechanical wear. But it has this one catastrophic failure mode that... Can we fix it? Vasquez made a sound that was not quite a yes and not quite a no. Their technology isn't directly compatible with ours. We can't just pull a coil from the Harrow's engine room and plug it in. Different power frequencies, different field geometries, different... Can we fix it? Reyes said again. Vasquez looked at the forward display, where the Meridian was now large enough to see its shape. I have some ideas, she said. Good. They're not proven ideas. I've never asked you for proven ideas, Vasquez. I've asked you for working ones. The engineer almost smiled. I'll need to get inside their engine room. We'll be in docking range in 40 minutes. Then I'll get my tools. On the Meridian, Commander Oral was having a difficult time explaining the situation to his crew. Not the mechanical situation, they understood that. What he was struggling to explain was the political situation. Which was, in compressed form, a human warship was coming to help them, and this was not, in any political sense, simple. Humans were an odd case in Covenant politics. They had joined the Covenant 60 years ago, late by any standard, and had spent the subsequent decades being simultaneously underestimated and vaguely unsettling to the older member species. Not because they were dangerous, though several incidents had demonstrated that they could be, but because they were unpredictable in a specific way. Most species, when they entered the Covenant, gradually adapted to its operating logic. Its slow bureaucratic rhythms. Its careful political calculations. Its embedded assumption that the right move was almost always the cautious one. Humans kept doing things like this. Like responding to an 11-day-old distress call that no one else had answered. Like doing it without authorization. Like apparently not particularly caring about the political consequences. Commander Oral found this less comforting than he felt it should be. Science Officer Velan Ross found it more comforting than she felt she had the right to. You look like you've already decided to trust them, Oral said to her quietly, while they watched the Harrow decelerate on the sensor display. I haven't decided anything, she said. I'm waiting to see. Keth is with them now. Not an accusation. An observation. He's in the observation bubble. He's watching them approach. She paused. He named the ship before I told him what it was. He recognized the human hull design from his engineering books. Oral made a sound that might have been a laugh in different circumstances. He's a good boy, Reyes said. He is, his mother agreed. And then very quietly, HFY. The docking took 22 minutes. Keth watched from the observation bubble as the Harrow moved alongside with a precision that made his heart do something complicated. A slow, aching appreciation for competence, for the way the human ship settled into position like it was breathing out. The maneuvering thrusters fired in small, controlled bursts, each one correcting a degree of drift, and the whole operation had the quality of a very careful conversation. Then the docking collar extended and the airlock cycled and everything changed. Commander Reyes came aboard the Meridian with 3 people. Her chief engineer Vasquez, a medical officer named Dr. Fenwick who moved like someone who had long ago made peace with emergency situations, and a young ensign named Torres who was there apparently to carry things. Reyes was taller than Keth had expected. He had seen humans before. Porthos Station had a substantial human population, but he had never been in a closed space with one and been struck by the simple physical reality of the species in the way he was now. She had a stillness about her. A conservation of motion that felt deliberate, like she had decided long ago only to move when movement was necessary. Commander Oral met them at the airlock with a formal Vethani greeting, right fist to left shoulder, a slight bow, which was the gesture that acknowledged someone as a person of significance whose intentions I have not yet assessed. It was a very honest gesture. Reyes, who apparently knew enough Vethani custom to recognize it, returned a slight nod that was the human equivalent. I see you and I mean you no harm. Keth was not supposed to be there. He had been told, specifically, to stay in the crew quarters. He had followed this instruction to the letter by walking to the crew quarters and then immediately walking back out, reasoning that the instruction had been about getting there rather than staying. He stood in the corridor at the edge of his mother's line of sight, which meant she could see him if she looked and chose to ignore him, which she did. Reyes noticed him immediately. Keth saw it, saw the moment her eyes found him, registered him, categorized him as not crew, young, significant somehow, and then she returned her full attention to Commander Oral without making a production of the noticing. That, Keth thought, was interesting. An adult who noticed a child without making the child feel observed. That was a skill. Commander Reyes, Oral said in Covenant Standard. The Cerethes Meridian acknowledges your response to our distress call. We are. He paused. The pause was almost invisible. Grateful. The word clearly cost him something. Not because he was ungrateful, Keth could tell the commander was deeply relieved, but because the political architecture of the situation made gratitude feel like a vulnerability. Reyes did not perform graciousness. She did not spread it thick like something to be admired. She just said, 41 people stranded is 41 people stranded. Where's your engine room? Oral blinked. Then he led her there. Vasquez stood in front of the Vethani motivator array for a long time without speaking. The array was beautiful. That was the first thought, and it surprised her enough that she noted it consciously. I am looking at a broken engine and my first thought is that it's beautiful. The braided architecture was unlike anything in human engineering. 3 motivator coils wound around each other in a helical pattern, each one roughly the size of a cargo container, their surfaces inscribed with the flowing geometric script that the Vethani used for technical notation. Under normal operation, those inscriptions would have been lit from within, a soft blue gold. Now they were dark, and the helix sagged slightly where the phase backwash had damaged the housing. Vethani engineering was entirely analog in its fundamental logic. No digital control systems. No binary switching. Everything was achieved through continuous field manipulation, an architecture that was, as Vasquez had told Reyes, genuinely more elegant than human motivator design. But elegance came with brittleness. The braided system had no fallback mode, no degraded operation capacity. You either had full phase coherence or you had nothing. The Meridian's chief engineer, a Vethani male named OSS who had the careful, slightly defensive manner of someone watching a stranger examine something precious, stood beside her. The phase inverter housing is cracked, Vasquez said, not a question. Yes, OSS said. And the field coupler in the second coil is fused. The backwash went through the coupling like current through wet copper, yes. She crouched down and looked at the base of the helix. Can I touch this? Pause. Why? Because I'm trying to understand the field geometry and I think better with my hands. Another pause. Then OSS made a gesture of assent. Vasquez pressed her palm flat against the housing of the third coil, the stabilizer. It was cold. Dead cold, the kind that meant no residual charge whatsoever. She closed her eyes. She was not doing anything mystical. She was doing something she had learned as a child, taking apart salvaged electronics in her grandmother's apartment, using touch to understand shape, to feel for the logic of a thing. The cold told her the stabilizer coil had discharged completely, which meant she opened her eyes. The stabilizer coil is intact, she said. OSS stared at her. That is not possible. The backwash. The backwash traveled through the phase sequence, primary to secondary to backup. It was directional. It followed the handoff chain. She stood up. The stabilizer coil is last in the sequence. The backwash exhausted itself in the coupling. That's why the coupling is fused rather than just damaged. It burned itself out, stopping the cascade. OSS said nothing for a long moment. Then, we diagnosed full array failure. You diagnosed based on the system showing zero output. Zero output from a stabilizer that discharged completely would look identical to zero output from a stabilizer that's destroyed. She paused. Has anyone actually run a structural integrity scan on that coil? The silence that followed was the specific silence of someone realizing that the answer to a question is no for a reason that felt logical at the time and now feels like an oversight. Run the scan, Vasquez said not unkindly. Keth had followed the engineers to the engine room. He stood in the doorway, again technically not violating any instruction, since no one had said don't follow the human engineer to the engine room, and watched Vasquez work with the focused intensity of someone who did not know or care that they were being watched. She was different from what he had expected. He wasn't sure what he had expected. Something more dramatic, maybe? Adventure serial stuff. Instead she was just a person who clearly found broken things interesting, who crouched on the floor of his ship's engine room and pressed her hand against the motivator housing like she was listening to it. Ensign Torres materialized beside Keth in the doorway, also watching. Torres was young, probably the youngest person on the Harrow, Keth guessed, which made him somewhere in his early 20s. He had the kind of face that still showed what he was thinking, which Keth appreciated. Adults usually worked hard to hide that. She always does that, Torres said quietly, meaning the hand on housing thing. The chief. She touches everything. Drives the diagnostic techs insane. Why does she do it? Keth asked. Torres considered. She says machines have logic and logic has shape and shape is physical. She learned engineering from her abuela before she ever studied it formally. He paused. I don't fully understand it, but she fixes things so. Keth looked at Vasquez, who was now sketching something in her technical journal with quick, confident strokes. Why did you come? He asked Torres. The question came out before he'd fully formed it. Your ship. There are 11 days of other ships that didn't. Why did you come? Torres was quiet for a moment. Not uncomfortable, just actually thinking about it. Commander Reyes got the report, he said finally, and she went quiet for about 30 seconds, and then she stood up and left her eggs and went to the bridge. He looked at Keth. When the commander leaves her eggs, you know something matters. Keth did not fully understand this answer, but he felt like it was an honest one and that was enough. My name is Keth, he said. Marcus, said Torres. Ensign Marcus Torres. But just Marcus is fine. Just Keth is fine too, Keth said. Below them, Vasquez began to sing very quietly to herself while she sketched. Something low and rhythmic in what Keth recognized as Spanish, though he didn't know the words. The engine room, dead and cold and broken, held the sound of it in its walls and gave it back slightly changed. Keth reached for his journal and began to draw. The scan confirmed it. The third coil was intact. This was, OSS admitted privately to himself, a significant oversight. Not catastrophic. The crew had been managing life support and communications and the very real anxiety of being stranded in deep space, but it was the kind of thing that, in a different context, would have been caught. The kind of thing that required a step back and a fresh perspective, neither of which were easily available when you were 11 days into a crisis. The good news, Vasquez said, spreading her sketches across the engineering console, is that you have a functional stabilizer coil. The bad news is that you still have a fused coupling and a cracked phase inverter housing, which means you can't use that coil to restart the array without solving those two problems first. Commander Oral, who had come down to the engine room, looked at the sketches. The phase inverter housing would need to be fabricated. We have no fabrication materials of the right spec. We have fabrication materials, Vasquez said. On the Harrow. But your housing spec and my fabrication spec are different enough that I can't manufacture a direct replacement. I can manufacture a bridge component. Something that interfaces between your housing architecture and a temporary stabilizer housing made from our materials. She paused. It's not a permanent repair. It would get you to the nearest port where you could have the proper housing manufactured. OSS was looking at her sketches. His expression was difficult to read, but Keth, who had stayed in the doorway and was now officially being allowed to stay there, which he took as validation of the entire strategy, thought the engineer looked like someone who was interested in spite of himself. This bridge component, OSS said. Your housing and our housing are non-conductive in different frequency bands. If you place them in contact, there will be a gap in the field continuity, yes. Which is why the bridge component isn't just a mechanical adapter. It's a frequency interpolator. It translates the field output from our housing geometry into something your coil can read. She tapped one of the sketches. This is the part I'm not sure about. The interpolation math works on paper, but I've never built one and the margin of error is non-trivial, OSS said. Non-trivial, Vasquez agreed. The two engineers looked at each other. It was not quite the look of people who trusted each other. There wasn't enough history for that. It was the look of people who recognized in each other a particular kind of mind. The kind that was more interested in whether the solution was correct than in whether it reflected well on the person who thought of it. Show me the interpolation math, OSS said. Vasquez turned the sketch pad toward him. Reyes was on the Meridian's bridge in conversation with Commander Oral when the message from the Harrow came through. It was not a dramatic message. It was a standard Covenant administrative notification, transmitted on the official fleet channel, addressed to the UES Harrow and logged for all receiving stations. Lieutenant Ocone read it to her over the comm link in his careful, neutral voice. The UES Harrow's unauthorized response to the distress signal of Vethani vessel Cerethes Meridian is noted and logged. Commander Reyes is reminded that the Vethani are currently under Covenant administrative review. Providing material assistance to a Vethani vessel without Covenant authorization may be interpreted as a political action in violation of the governance realignment framework. Commander Reyes is requested to file a full operational report upon return to port. Acknowledged, Reyes said. Continue the repair. Yes, Commander. She set down the comm link. Oral was watching her from across the bridge. The message was logged at Covenant Relay and transmitted station-wide, he said. It was not a question. The message had come through on the Meridian's bridge systems too. Every Covenant ship in this sector will have received it. Yes. They want a record that they objected. They want a record that they objected, Reyes agreed. And you don't care. She looked at him steadily. The Harrow responded to a valid distress signal. If the Covenant's political framework considers 41 people stranded in deep space to be a problem that needs bureaucratic authorization to address, she stopped. I'll file the report. Oral was quiet for a long moment. The bridge crew of the Meridian, those who were on shift, tending to the life support systems and the communication arrays that were still functioning, were very carefully not appearing to listen. Commander Reyes, Oral said slowly as if he were considering each word individually, I want to be transparent with you about something. Please. When we received the signal that you were approaching, my first thought was not gratitude. He looked at her steadily. My first thought was that a human warship responding to a Vethani distress call without authorization during the governance realignment, that this could be a political maneuver. That there might be a reason your government would benefit from being seen to help us. That this might be a performance, Reyes said. Yes. Silence. Is it? Oral asked. Reyes thought about it. Actually thought about it, didn't give him the quick, comfortable answer. She considered whether her government had known about the distress call and whether they might have expected or hoped she would respond to it and whether that expectation might have factored, in some buried political calculation, into not ordering her elsewhere. She did not know the answers to those questions. She was a ship's commander, not a policy analyst. She knew her own reasons, but she was honest enough to acknowledge that reasons could be nested inside other reasons without the person acting being fully aware. I don't know what my government is thinking, she said finally. I know what I'm thinking. 41 people. 11 days. One of them a kid. She paused. That's enough for me. Whether it's also something else. She spread her hands slightly, a gesture of genuine uncertainty. I can't tell you it's not. Oral looked at her for a long moment. Then he made a small, deliberate motion, a gesture Keth would have recognized as the Vethani sign for I see the thing behind the thing, and I acknowledge it. That is the most honest answer I have received from a Covenant officer in 3 years, he said quietly. Vasquez and OSS worked through what passed for night on the Meridian, the ship's lights cycling to low amber at the 18th hour mark, the crew retreating to sleeping quarters and shifts, the hum of the life support system providing the ship's only reliable heartbeat. They worked by the light of 2 portable lamp units, spreading tools and components across the engine room floor like a map being made in real time. Keth slept for 4 hours and then came back. He found Marcus Torres sitting in the corridor outside the engine room, doing nothing. Just sitting back against the wall, arms resting on his knees, eyes half open. Like someone who was content to exist in a space without needing to do anything in it. Keth sat down beside him. Don't you sleep? Keth asked. I did, Torres said. 4 hours. That's what I take. That's not enough. It's what I take. They sat together in the amber-lit corridor, listening to the muffled sounds of tools and conversation from the engine room, and the quieter sound of the ship around them doing the minimum work of keeping 41 people alive. Are you afraid? Keth asked. Torres considered. Of what specifically? Any of it. Being out here. The repair not working. The Covenant's message. The Covenant message doesn't scare me, Torres said. That's Commander Reyes's problem, and she seems approximately unbothered by it, so. He paused. The repair. He tilted his head toward the engine room. You've heard Chief Vasquez work. Does she sound like someone doing something she's afraid won't work? Keth listened. From inside the engine room came the sound of Vasquez explaining something to OSS in rapid, enthusiastic Covenant standard, her voice carrying the particular rhythm of someone who was excited by the problem rather than oppressed by it. No, Keth said. There you go. What about the first thing? Being out here? Torres was quiet for longer this time. Sometimes, he said. Not tonight specifically. But sometimes you look out at it and the scale of it does something to you. Like, he searched for words. You know the feeling when you look at something so large that your eyes can't really hold it? A mountain range or the ocean. Your brain is technically receiving the information, but there's a part of it that keeps trying to make it smaller than it is. Keth knew that feeling. He had named it in his journal 3 years ago, the thought that folds. He didn't share the name. That felt too private. But he nodded. Space does that to me sometimes, Torres said. Not in a bad way. In the way that reminds you that the map is not the territory. That everything I know how to think about is actually very small and the real thing is... He gestured vaguely at the hull, at the dark beyond it. Yes, Keth said simply. They sat in silence for a while. Comfortable silence, the kind that doesn't require filling. Then Keth said, Can I ask you something about the repair? The technical thing? I'm not an engineer. I know. I want to ask you something non-technical. Torres looked at him curiously. Okay. Chief Vasquez has ideas about how to fix our engine. She said the math works on paper but she's never built the component. Ensign OS, he corrected himself, Engineer OS, he's been working with her for hours. He clearly thinks she might be right. But it's a thing that's never been tried. He paused. If the frequency interpolator doesn't work, if the field gap is too wide, it won't just fail. It could cause another backwash. Could destroy the third coil too. Torres nodded slowly, following. So they're building something that might make everything worse, Keth said. And they're choosing to do it anyway. And I want to understand why that isn't, why they don't seem afraid, Torres said. They're not performing confidence. I can tell the difference. They're actually okay with the risk, Torres said. He thought about it. I think Chief Vasquez doesn't experience risk the way risk is supposed to feel. Like, for most people, risk is the feeling of standing at the edge of a drop. You know what could happen. The knowing is the frightening part. And for her? For her, I think the risk is just part of the information. It's a parameter. It goes into the calculation along with everything else and the calculation either clears or it doesn't. He paused. She told me once that the most dangerous engineer is the one who builds something they understand completely. Because if you only do what you understand, you never discover the limits of what's possible. Keth opened his journal. Wrote that down. Torres watched him write. What do you draw in there? He asked. Everything, Keth said. Stars, ships, people. Ideas I don't have words for yet. Show me one sometime. Maybe, Keth said. Which meant yes. Inside the engine room, Vasquez and OSS had stopped arguing and started building. The argument, a productive one, the kind that sharpened rather than broke things, had lasted about 2 hours and had covered the frequency interpolation math from 6 different angles. OSS had found a genuine error in Vasquez's third-order calculation, which she had corrected without any visible ego involvement in having made it. Vasquez had found a structural assumption in the Vethani phase handoff protocol that OSS had treated as fixed and inviolable for 20 years of engineering work, and had asked him why it was fixed, and he had not been able to give her a satisfying answer, and the realization that his answer was because that is how it is done rather than because that is the only way it can work had opened something in him. Not immediately. It opened slowly, the way things open when they are being held shut by the weight of accumulated habit. If the handoff timing is adjustable, OSS said for the third time as if testing the idea by repeating it. The Vethani spec sheet says it's fixed. But a fixed handoff timing is a choice, not a physical law. Vasquez turned a component in her hands. If we can introduce a small timing variability at the coupling interface, just a fractional delay, we might be able to smooth the field gap without the interpolator needing to work perfectly. It would take pressure off the component. OSS stared at the coupling interface. That has never been done, he said. Has it been tried? Pause. I don't know, OSS said. And then, I genuinely don't know. Then we might be the first, Vasquez said, and the way she said it carried no pride, just a kind of plain, clear-eyed acknowledgement. As if being first was interesting but not more interesting than whether the thing would work. OSS picked up a calibration tool. Turned it in his hands the way Vasquez had turned the component. The gesture of a person engaging with a physical object as a way of thinking. My instructor at the Vethani Academy of Technical Sciences, he said slowly, told us that the greatest danger in engineering is the belief that a working system is a finished system. Smart instructor, Vasquez said. She was. He set the calibration tool against the coupling interface. I think I understand what you are trying to do. I want to show you where I think the risk is highest. Show me. He showed her. She looked and revised and showed him the revision. He found another issue. She incorporated it. It was the kind of collaboration that has no good word in most languages, not agreement, not compromise, not synthesis. Something more like two different instruments playing separate lines that happened to fit together into something neither could have produced alone. Outside, in the amber-lit corridor, Keth was drawing. He drew Vasquez as he had seen her earlier, crouching with her hand flat against the motivator housing, eyes closed. He drew it carefully, taking time on the expression, the specific quality of attention she had brought to the broken thing. Not pity. Not frustration. Interest. The face of someone who found the thing in front of them genuinely worth understanding. He labeled the drawing in Vethani. The word he chose was karo, a Vethani term with no single English equivalent. It meant something like, to look at a broken thing with the intention of understanding it rather than fixing it, knowing that understanding must come first. His mother found him there at the 3rd hour and did not send him to bed. She sat against the wall beside him and looked at the drawing and put her arm around him, and they listened together to the sounds of the two engineers working inside. The frequency interpolator was built by the 14th hour. It was not beautiful. It was approximately the size of a briefcase, assembled from components drawn from both ship stores, and it had the honest, functional ugliness of a thing made from whatever was available. Vasquez had sealed 2 joins with a carbon polymer bonding compound that she used for hull microfractures. OSS had incorporated 3 components cannibalized from a backup navigation relay. The whole assembly was held in a diagnostic cradle that Torres had fabricated from the Harrow's workshop using specifications Vasquez had dictated from memory, correcting herself twice. They ran diagnostics on it for 2 hours before touching the motivator array. The diagnostic results were promising with reservations. Field translation efficiency is at 83%, OSS said, reading the numbers. We need 92 for a full restart, Vasquez said. The timing variability modification in the coupling might make up part of the gap. Might. They looked at each other. If we initiate the restart and the efficiency is below critical threshold, OSS said, the 3rd coil will receive a charge it cannot properly ground. It will. Discharge catastrophically, yes, Vasquez said. I know. You seem calm about this. I'm not calm. I've done my math 4 times and I can't find the error, but there might be one. She paused. I'm choosing to proceed anyway, which isn't the same as calm. Calm is when you're not afraid. I'm afraid. I'm proceeding. Osis looked at her for a long moment. He made the Vethani gesture his mother and Commander Oral had made, the one that meant I see the thing behind the thing and I acknowledge it. It was, Vasquez would note to herself later, the first explicitly Vethani gesture she had ever had directed at her, and it hit her somewhere unexpected. We proceed, Osis said. Commander Reyes had been awake for 22 hours and showed it only slightly, in the slight tightness around her eyes and the quality of stillness she carried, which had shifted from deliberate to preserved, like someone managing a diminishing resource. She was on the Meridian's bridge when Vasquez called in. We're ready to initiate the test restart, Vasquez said over the comm limited scope. We're going to try to bring the backup array online at 20% capacity. If the interpolator holds at that load, we scale up. If it doesn't hold, you'll know immediately, Reyes said. Immediately, yes. Either it works or it very clearly doesn't. Understood. Proceed when ready, Chief. Pause. Then, Commander. I want to say something. Reyes waited. When we plotted course for this ship, I was doing the motivator specs math and I genuinely thought we might not be able to help. The incompatibility between the systems is real and significant. If OSS hadn't been the engineer he is, if we hadn't been able to work together on the coupling modification, we wouldn't have a viable solution right now. Another pause. I'm saying this because I want you to know that what's about to happen isn't just us helping them. It's something that required both of us. I don't know if that matters. It matters, Reyes said. Okay. A breath. Initiating in 30 seconds. On the bridge of the Meridian, the crew who were present went very still. The kind of stillness that is the human, or Vethani or any embodied creature's, response to the moment before something decisive happens. The body knows before the mind admits. This is the hinge. Keth was standing in the doorway of the bridge. His mother was at her station, hands folded on the console in front of her because there was nothing for her to do right now and she needed something to do with her hands. Commander Oral stood at the center of the bridge, back straight, the posture of a captain who would face what came in a way that didn't burden his crew with his own fear. 20 seconds. The Sethera veil was still visible in the forward display, that loose spray of young blue-white stars that Keth had been drawing when the world changed. 10 seconds. Keth pressed his journal to his chest. The backup array came online with a sound like a bell. That was the only way to describe it. Not the clang of machinery engaging, not the industrial grunt of power systems waking up, but a clear, resonant tone that moved through the Meridian's hull like a note through water. The Vethani braided architecture, when operating, did not sound like human engines sounded. It vibrated at a frequency that the hull itself turned into sound, and the sound was beautiful, was the word that occurred to 4 different people on the bridge simultaneously, not one of whom said it aloud. The diagnostic board went from amber to green. Not all of it, not yet. But the backup array indicators climbed, 12%, 18, 21, 22, stabilizing at 23. Field translation efficiency at 89%. Oasis's voice came over the comm, and there was something in it, barely audible but present, that Keth recognized as the Vethani equivalent of joy. Not performed, not dramatic. Just a voice slightly larger than usual, a voice that had made room for something good. Timing variability modification is compensating correctly. The coupling is holding. Vasquez's voice followed, and she was not barely anything. She was laughing, a short and completely unguarded sound. 89. We needed 89. We got 89. On the bridge, one of the young Vethani navigation officers pressed both palms flat on her console and closed her eyes. The research specialist from the Covenant Observer team let out a breath that had clearly been held for a while. Commander Oral's shoulders moved. A minute shift, nearly invisible, the tension in them releasing like a mechanism disengaging. Velan Ross, Chief Science Officer, mother of one, turned from her console to find her son in the doorway and crossed the bridge in 4 steps and put her arms around him and held on. Keth held on back. Over her shoulder, he could see the Seth-era veil in the forward display, burning the same as always, patient and ancient and full of patterns he didn't yet understand. HFY, he thought. Everything changes from this point forward. The full motivator restart took another 6 hours. Moving from 23% on the backup array to a full restart of the primary required careful sequencing. Each step building on the last, the interpolator and the coupling modification working in concert to bridge the gap between the 2 engineering architectures. Vasquez and OSS took turns monitoring the array in 4-hour shifts, sleeping in relay on cots Torres brought down from the Harrow's crew quarters. At some point during this period, Torres and Keth took over the documentation. This had not been planned. It emerged because Torres had been logging operational notes for Vasquez on his data pad and Keth had been watching, and at a certain point Keth had said, "Your notation system is less efficient than it could be," in the tone of someone who had spent a long time with Vethani technical notation and found Covenant standard technical shorthand somewhat barbaric by comparison. Torres had looked at his pad and said, "Okay, show me a better one," and Keth had taken the pad and done so, and after that they had been doing the documentation together. They worked in opposite corners of the engine room so they weren't in the way, cross-referencing readings and comparing notation systems and in the space between talking. "Do you want to be an engineer?" Torres asked, watching Keth render a particularly complicated field geometry diagram with the kind of precision that took most adults years to develop. "I don't know yet," Keth said. "I want to understand things. Engineering is part of that. So is my mother's work. So is," he paused looking for words, "pattern recognition. The thing underneath things." He glanced at Torres. "Do you know what you want to do?" "I'm doing it," Torres said, surprised by his own certainty when he said it. "Being an ensign? Being on a ship? Being in this?" He gestured at the walls, the darkness implied beyond them. "Being the kind of person who goes out here." He paused. "I grew up in a city. Really dense, really loud, everything close together. And I always had this feeling like I was too large for the space I was in. Not physically. Just. The opposite of the folding thought," Keth said. Torres looked at him. "You describe the thing space does sometimes," Keth said. "The thing that makes you feel too small. You're describing the other side of that." "Yeah," Torres said slowly. "Yeah, exactly. Too large for the spaces available." He looked up at the ceiling, the hull beyond it. "Out here you don't feel large or small. You just feel proportionate," Keth said. Torres pointed at him. "Yes, that." Commander Reyes had returned to the Harrow for the middle hours of the repair cycle to handle the operational administration that didn't pause for anything. Crew schedules, supply logs, and the report that the Covenant had requested. She sat in her cabin and wrote the report honestly. She described receiving the distress signal. She described its age, 11 days, and the absence of response from any other vessel or station. She described the 41 souls and the motivator failure and the decision to plot an intercept course. She wrote, "The UES Harrow responded to a valid distress signal under established maritime law protocol. The Vethani status under Covenant administrative review was noted. The decision was made that the applicable law governing response to life-threatening distress situations takes precedence over administrative review frameworks. This decision was the responsibility of the commanding officer. She paused at the last line for a moment. Then she submitted the report. Then she did something that was not part of the official report. She wrote a personal log entry, the kind she kept in a separate, unshared file, the kind she had been writing since her first day in deep space. 11 days, she wrote. I keep coming back to that. 11 days of signals going out and no one moving. Not because they didn't hear. Because hearing became a political calculation. There is a kind of blindness that is specifically produced by systems. Not individual cruelty. Most of the people who received that signal and kept moving were probably not cruel people. The blindness is a feature of how the system distributes responsibility. If you are one of 30 potential responders and responding has a cost and the cost is political, and the responsibility is distributed across all 30 of you, then your share of the responsibility is small enough to be rationalized. You file the log, you keep moving, you are one of 30 people making the same small decision. But on the other side of those 30 small decisions are 41 people in a dead ship. I don't think I'm a hero. I don't think I did something exceptional. I think I did the thing that the law and basic human decency require, and the fact that it needed to be noted and justified and will result in an administrative review is the problem, not the solution. The kid draws. His name is Keth. He has his mother's eyes and a habit of asking questions that sound simple and aren't. HFY. From this point forward, everything changes. I don't know what it changes into. But I know the before and the after are different. She closed the file. Outside her cabin window, the Meridian hung in space against the Seth-era veil, and the first faint light of the restarting motivator array was beginning to glow in her engine ports. A soft blue gold, like something coming back to life. On the 18th hour of the joint operation, with the Meridian's primary array at 40% and climbing steadily, Commander Oral came to find Reyes where she was sitting in the Meridian's small common room with a cup of something hot. He sat across from her. For a moment neither of them spoke. The Vethani habit of the deliberate pause before words, which Oral practiced more consistently than almost anyone on his crew, extended the silence in a way that felt considered rather than awkward. I owe you an explanation, he said finally. You don't owe me anything, Reyes said. I do. When we spoke on the bridge, when I asked whether this was a political performance, I was not only asking about your government. I was asking about you personally. That was an accusation dressed as a question. He set his hands on the table. I have spent 3 years interacting with Covenant officers and officials and intermediaries, and almost all of them have been performing. Performing neutrality, performing fairness, performing concern. And I have become so accustomed to the performance that I have difficulty recognizing the real thing when it appears. Reyes looked at her cup. It's a reasonable adaptation to your situation. It is. And it is also corrosive. I look at Keth. He stopped. He is not adapted yet. He still approaches people with an openness that I have largely lost. Pause. He approached your engineer that way. And your ensign. And they responded to it honestly. They're good people, Reyes said. They are. And that is, right now, more than I can simply accept without thinking about it. Oral's voice carried something that Reyes had not heard in it before, a fatigue that was not physical. The particular exhaustion of someone who has been vigilant for too long. I am tired of everyone having an agenda. I am tired of assessing every interaction for its political valence. I am tired of the governance realignment and what it has made all of us into. Reyes was quiet for a long moment. I don't know how to fix that, she said. I don't know how to fix what the past 3 years have done to the relationship between the Covenant and your people. I can fix, she corrected herself. Vasquez can fix a motivator array. The political thing is beyond my rank and probably beyond my understanding. Yes, Oral said. But for what it's worth, she looked at him directly. For this specific situation, the 41 of you, the hero being here, there is no agenda. There is nothing complicated. Oral looked back at her. The Vethani habit of reading faces. They were gifted at it, having evolved in a social environment where subtle expression was a survival skill, gave him access to registers of expression that most humans didn't even know they were broadcasting. He read Reyes's face. No, he said slowly. I don't think there is. And the specific weight of his tone, the recalibration in it, the adjustment of a deeply held prior belief being revised not to its opposite but to something more accurate, made Reyes's chest do something she wasn't expecting. She picked up her cup and drank. Your son draws well, she said. Something changed in Oral's face. Softened in a way that made him look younger. He draws everything. He always has. Since he was small. His grandmother used to say that Keth arrived in the world with more questions than his mouth could handle, so his hands decided to answer some of them. Reyes smiled. It was a small smile, not performed. You miss her, she said. The grandmother. She died 2 years ago. He said it simply. Before the governance realignment. She never saw the Vethani become what we are now, a people under review. She would have had thoughts about it. A beat. Very loud thoughts. Loud grandmothers are universal, Reyes said. Oral made a sound that was definitely a laugh. Keth was in the observation bubble again when his mother came to find him. The stars were the same stars they had always been, but the Harrow was there now, beside them, its navigation lights making a slow, patient pattern in the dark. And the faint blue gold of the recovering motivator array was beginning to show in the engine ports below. How are you? His mother asked, settling beside him. I've been thinking about something, Keth said. Tell me. Commander Oral said that the Covenant ships received our signal and didn't come because we're Vethani. And that's a political reason, which is a real reason. But it's also, he turned his journal to a new page, didn't draw on it, just looked at the blank space. It's also a reason that has to be maintained. Kept in place. You have to keep choosing it every time. His mother waited. And Commander Reyes made a different choice. And she'll have a report to file and there might be consequences. But she made it anyway. He paused. I'm thinking about what that means. What it takes to make a choice that costs you something when the easier choice is available. His mother looked at the Harrow outside the glass. I think, she said carefully, that it requires believing that the cost of making the wrong choice is greater than the cost of making the right one. Even when the wrong choice is invisible, when no one would see it, when the log gets filed and the ship keeps moving and the responsibility is distributed across 30 vessels and no one is particularly at fault. She paused. Commander Reyes has decided that she is not 30 vessels. She is one vessel. And the choice belongs entirely to her. Keth looked at the observation glass. At the Harrow. At the Seth-era veil behind it. Caro, he said quietly. What? He showed her the drawing he had made, Vasquez kneeling, hand on the motivator housing, eyes closed. I labeled it Caro, he said. But I think it means more than I thought it did when I wrote it. I thought it was about the engine. I think it's about everything. Looking at the broken thing with the intention of understanding it. Not fixing it. Understanding it first. He closed the journal. I think Commander Reyes did Caro with the distress call. Everyone else saw it as a political problem. She looked at it with the intention of understanding what it actually was. Velan Ross looked at her son for a long time. HFY, she said softly. Everything changes, Keth agreed. The primary motivator array came fully online at hour 26. Not the dramatic, instantaneous everything works now moment of adventure serial stories. The Vethani braided architecture didn't operate that way. It came online the way a complex piece of music comes together in a rehearsal. Gradually, each element finding its relationship to the others, the whole emerging from the interactions rather than the parts. At 60%, the Meridian was making navigational calculations. At 75%, Navigator RHE ran test plots to the nearest Vethani port, Velaroth Station, 14 hours at reduced speed. At 90%, Commander Oral called the full crew to stations. At 94%, with the interpolator and the coupling modification operating within acceptable parameters, OSS sent a diagnostic report to Chief Engineer Vasquez that read, in full, efficiency holding at 91.7. The modification is working. I have written up a full technical analysis. I would like to share it with you. Vasquez sent back, I would like that too. And then, because she was Vasquez, she added, also you found that third-order error in my calculation. I want to understand how you saw it. I stared at it 4 times and missed it. OSS replied, pattern recognition. The Vethani phase handoff sequence has a specific mathematical rhythm. When your calculation disrupted that rhythm, it felt wrong before I could identify why. I had to work backward from the feeling to find the error. Vasquez replied, that is the most interesting thing anyone has said to me in 6 months. The hour before separation was strange. There was no agreed protocol for this specific situation. A human warship completing an unauthorized rescue of a Vethani vessel during the governance realignment had not generated sufficient precedent for official protocol to exist. So they made it up as they went, which is what people usually do with unprecedented things. The Harrow's medical officer, Dr. Fenwick, had spent the intervening hours quietly and thoroughly assessing the Meridian's crew for injury and deferred health concerns. He had treated 4 cases of stress-induced cardiovascular elevation, 2 minor lacerations from the initial explosion, 1 case of severe dehydration in a crew member who had apparently forgotten to drink water for approximately 60 hours, and 1 case of what he diagnosed in his notes as entirely reasonable levels of traumatic stress in a juvenile, which was Keth, and for which his prescribed treatment was continued access to the activities he is already engaging in, specifically the drawing and conversation and ideally more sleep. Commander Oral formally requested that Dr. Fenwick's medical records be transmitted to the Meridian's medical database. Fenwick agreed and spent an hour with the Vethani medical officer going through them, exchanging notes on the physiological differences that affected treatment protocols. The Vethani medical officer sent back 3 years of his own research on stress response in deep space crew environments. Fenwick said, "This is very good work." The medical officer said, "It has not been published in Covenant-accessible journals because of the governance realignment." Fenwick said, "That is a loss for everyone." Torres and Keth had exchanged data pad contact information, which across the gap between human and Vethani communication networks was complicated enough that Torres had to ask the Harrow's communications officer for help routing it. "You're maintaining contact with a Vethani national," the communications officer noted, "not judgmentally, just observationally." "I'm maintaining contact with someone I met," Torres said. The communications officer routed the connection. Vasquez and OSS stood in the engine room together one last time, looking at the motivator array. It ran now with the soft bell-tone resonance of a properly functioning Vethani drive system, the blue-gold inscriptions alive with field activity. The interpolator sat at the base of the array, connected and operational, a hybrid thing, made from two different engineering traditions, not pretty entirely functional. "The interpolator cannot run indefinitely," OSS said. "The bonding compound Chief Vasquez used on the joins will degrade at approximately 800 hours under continuous operation," Vasquez said. "After that, the field translation efficiency will drop. You'll have warning, the diagnostic board will start showing fluctuation before it becomes critical." She paused. "You have a 14-hour run to Velaroth at reduced capacity. At the station, you can have the proper housing fabricated and the temporary components replaced with permanent ones." "And the coupling modification?" Vasquez turned to look at him. "The coupling modification is yours. You understand it better than I do. You were the one who found the mathematical rhythm issue that made it work. Document it. It might be worth publishing." OSS was quiet for a moment. Then he made a gesture that Vasquez didn't know, both hands raised slightly from the sides, palms forward. Later, when she described it to Torres, he would look it up in a Vethani cultural reference database and tell her it was called Velith. A gesture made when one person acknowledges that another has changed the way they understand something. Not thanks for help received. Thanks for a perspective that shifted the world slightly on its axis. Vasquez, not knowing its meaning but feeling the weight of it, nodded. Commander Reyes and Commander Oral stood at the airlock for the separation. "Velaroth," Reyes said. 14 hours. Full crew check-in at arrival." "Agreed." Oral paused. "We will file a full incident report with the Covenant detailing the circumstances of the rescue and the conduct of the Harrow's crew." He paused again. "It may not help with the administrative review, but it will be on record." "That's not why I came," Reyes said. "I know," Oral said. "That is why it will be on record." They did not shake hands. The gap between their respective cultures' physical greeting protocols was too complicated for the moment. Instead, Oral performed the formal Vethani gesture of farewell, right hand to the left side of the chest, held. It was the gesture that acknowledged someone as a person whose existence has changed the shape of things. Reyes put her right fist to her left shoulder. The meeting gesture from earlier, the one that said person of significance whose intentions I have not yet assessed. She had held onto it deliberately. Now she changed it. She opened her right hand, palm forward. The human acknowledgement of an encounter completed in good faith. Oral saw the distinction. He understood it. "Safe passage, Commander Reyes," he said. "Safe passage, Commander Oral," she said. The airlock cycled. The docking collar retracted. The two ships separated with the careful, deliberate patience of bodies that have been in close proximity and are now giving each other space. Keth watched from the observation bubble. The Harrow moved away, slowly, its navigation lights making their patient pattern against the dark. Keth watched until it was a point of light, and then a point among points, and then, because the Meridian was moving now, finally moving, the braided motivator array singing its bell-tone song through the hull, until it was indistinguishable from the stars. He opened his journal. He drew the Harrow from memory, not from the outside the way he had drawn it when it was approaching, but from inside, from the observation bubble's perspective, looking out at it. The hull, the angles, the navigation lights. The dark around it, and the Sethera veil behind it, and the faint impression of stars so distant they were suggestions rather than things. He wrote a word beneath the drawing. Not Caro. Not a SYMJHY. A new word. One he was inventing as he wrote it, which was a Vethani tradition for things that had no existing name. Selhari. The word for the feeling of watching someone leave whom you have only just begun to understand, knowing the understanding will continue in their absence. Velaroth Station was the largest Vethani-operated installation in the outer systems. A turning, torus-shaped structure with docking capacity for 300 vessels, built in the Great Expansion era before the governance realignment had changed what expansion meant for the Vethani. It still turned. It still held 300 berths. But in the current political climate, those berths were occupied at less than half capacity, because the Vethani trade network had contracted, because the Covenant's administrative review affected their commercial relationships, because uncertainty was bad for traffic. The Meridian arrived 14 hours and 11 minutes after separation from the Harrow, exactly within the predicted range. The interpolator had held. The coupling modification had held. The bell tone of the motivator array had been continuous and clear throughout the approach. Keth stood on the observation deck, the full observation deck this time with its wide curved windows, not the small bubble, and watched the station grow in the dark. He had been to Velaroth before twice, but had not thought about it with this particular attention. The effort it represented, the engineering and the resources and the generations of Vethani who had decided this was worth doing and done it. His mother came to stand beside him. "Your father called," she said. "He's been watching the news feeds. He knows what happened." She paused. "He wants to speak with you." Keth nodded. He would speak to his father. He would tell him things that a news feed wouldn't show, the cold of the motivator housing under Vasquez's palm, the sound the bell tone made when the array came back, the specific quality of Torres's silence when he was thinking. "Mom," he said. "What happens now? With the Harrow? With Commander Reyes?" "There will be an administrative review as the Covenant's message indicated," his mother said. "Commander Reyes will have to account for her decision. That will likely be unpleasant for her. Will there be consequences? I don't know. Probably minor ones by the standards of these things." Pause. "But that is not what you're asking." He turned to look at her. She was still watching the station approach. "What I'm asking," he said slowly, "is what it means. For bigger things. Not just us, not just the 41 people on this ship. For the governance realignment. For what the Covenant thinks of us. Does it change anything?" His mother was quiet for a long time. The station was large now, filling the lower third of the observation window, its lights intricate and patient against the dark. "I don't know," she said finally. "One ship. One decision. 41 people." She paused. "Caro maybe. Maybe what Commander Reyes did was Caro. Not a repair but an understanding. Not a solution but a new angle of view." She looked at him. "What changes from understanding is different from what changes from action. Slower. Less certain. But sometimes more real." Keth thought about this for the rest of the docking approach. He thought about it when the docking clamps engaged and the vibration moved through the hull and the bell tone faded to a quiet murmur. He thought about it when his father's face appeared on the communication screen and his father said his name in the voice of a person who had been very afraid and was now very relieved and was doing his best not to show either. He thought about it when he tried to sleep that night and found himself lying awake in the dark of his bunk, listening to the sounds of the station, so different from the ship's sounds, full of other people's movements and voices and the distant clank of machinery doing its work in the dark. Selhari. The understanding that would continue in the absence. He opened his journal in the dark and wrote without drawing. The thing about understanding is that it does not stop when the person leaves. You carry the new shape of things with you and you see through it even when you're somewhere else, even when the thing that changed the shape is gone. I understood something about Vasquez that I can use to understand OSS. I understood something about Reyes that I can use to understand the governance realignment. I understood something about Torres that I can use to understand what I want my life to be. None of them knew they were teaching me. That's the thing about Caro, you can't do it intentionally. It only works if the attention is real. He closed the journal and slept. On the UES Harrow, 14 hours back at standard cruise toward the Covenant reporting station, Commander Reyes was also awake. She was in the observation lounge, a small room at the ship's nose, barely large enough for 4 people, its walls mostly glass. She came here sometimes when she needed to think without the weight of the captain's chair. She thought about the report. About the administrative review. About the Covenant message and the 30 ships that hadn't come and the one that had. She thought about Oral's face when he had recalibrated, when the assessment behind his eyes had shifted. The specific quality of that shift, which was not warmth exactly but honesty. The closing of a small, bitter gap that had opened between what he expected and what was real. She thought about Keth in the engine room doorway, drawing Vasquez from life with the dedicated attention of someone building a record of the world. She pulled out her own notepad, paper, not electronic, the habit of an analog childhood, and wrote a line. What the system cannot see is the specific weight of a specific person. She looked at that for a while. Then she added, the system logged the signal. It measured response times and political risk and administrative implications. But it couldn't see Keth. Couldn't see Oral's exhaustion. Couldn't see OSS finding an error in math he'd never questioned before. Couldn't see the two engineers working in the amber light. The things that matter most do not aggregate well. They have to be seen up close. She put the notepad away. Looked at the stars. Somewhere in the direction of Velaroth Station, 41 people were sleeping. The bell tone of the motivator array was moving through the hull of the Meridian, faint now at low maintenance frequency, but there. Present. Real. She turned off the light and sat in the dark with the stars and let herself be very small in the good way, the proportionate way, the way Torres had described, the way that was not frightening. The administrative review lasted 6 weeks. This was, by Covenant bureaucratic standards, swift. The governance realignment had generated enormous amounts of administrative work for the Covenant Council, and the political machinery was slow by design, built for deliberation rather than speed. But the Harrow incident, as it was formally titled in the proceedings, had attracted a degree of attention that made deliberation feel expensive. The attention came from an unexpected direction. OSS had submitted his technical report on the coupling modification to the Vethani Academic Council. The council, recognizing its significance, had published it in the Journal of Applied Vethani Engineering, which, under the governance realignment, was not distributed to Covenant academic databases. But the abstract was publicly accessible, and the abstract had been noted by a human aerospace engineering professor at the University of Jakarta, who had pulled the full paper through an academic exchange protocol that technically predated the realignment and had not been formally revoked. The professor had then published a commentary in the open-access journal Deep Space Engineering Quarterly calling the coupling modification and the frequency interpolator concept the most significant cross-species engineering collaboration since the development of the quantum drive translation protocols in 2187. He had also called the fact that the paper was not in Covenant databases an example of the governance realignment harming everyone equally, including the parties who believe they are benefiting from it. The commentary had been republished in 14 subsequent journals and 12 news analysis platforms. This had made the administrative review of Commander Reyes's decision politically complicated in ways the Covenant Council had not anticipated. Because the story was no longer human warship illegally assists Vethani vessel. The story had become, in a significant portion of public discourse, unauthorized rescue produces engineering breakthrough that benefits everyone. Reyes had not planned this. Vasquez had not planned this. Neither of them knew about the journal article until Lieutenant Ocon brought Reyes a summary of the coverage with the expression of someone delivering news that was good in several ways and uncomfortable in several others. The Covenant Council is receiving public calls to recognize the rescue as legitimate rather than censuring it, Ocon said. I didn't do it to be recognized, Reyes said. I know, Commander. But it may affect the review outcome. How is Vasquez handling the attention? She submitted a formal correction to the Jakarta professor's commentary because he slightly overstated the engineering significance of the frequency interpolator. The correction itself has now also been published. Reyes pressed her fingers to her forehead briefly. Of course it has. She also sent a personal message to engineer OSS noting that the paper was excellent and the journal was correct to publish it. OSS replied at length. They appear to be conducting an ongoing technical correspondence. Good, Reyes said and meant it. The review concluded on a Tuesday. The formal decision was, the UES Harrow's response to distress signal RX-4471V is recognized as consistent with established maritime law protocol under Section 7, Paragraph 4 of the Covenant Deep Space Conduct Code, which supersedes administrative review frameworks in documented life-threatening emergencies. Commander Reyes's action was within her authority as commanding officer. No formal censure is issued. The Covenant Council notes the value of the engineering collaboration that emerged from the incident and recommends that the Governance Realignment Task Force review the impact of current restrictions on academic and technical exchange. The last sentence had been inserted, Reyes later learned, after 11 hours of negotiation among council members and in direct response to the public commentary. She read the decision and set it down. She thought about Oral, who had asked if the rescue was a performance. The council's recommendation, review the impact of current restrictions, was going to be used by someone, somewhere, as a performance. The story would be told in a way that made it useful, that extracted from it the parts that served various arguments. She couldn't control that. She could only control what she had actually done and why she had actually done it. She wrote a brief message to Oral, through official Covenant channels because that was the only available route. The review concluded favorably. I hope the Meridian and her crew are well. I hope Keth has been drawing. The response came 3 days later, which was the communication delay of the current political situation. Messages to Vethani destinations were being routed through additional bureaucratic checkpoints. The Meridian is fully operational. The coupling modification has been made permanent by the engineers at Velaroth Station. Keth has been drawing. He has started a new journal. He says he wants to name it after a concept from a conversation he had with your ensign Torres, but he hasn't settled on the right word yet. The Academic Council has received multiple requests to restore access to the Journal of Applied Vethani Engineering through Covenant databases. I do not know if this will happen, but it is being asked. I find myself thinking about what you said, that the political thing is beyond your rank and probably beyond your understanding. I have been thinking about the word beyond, and whether it is the right word. Perhaps beside is more accurate. The political thing is not beyond you or above you. It is beside you. You operate beside it. What you did, what your crew did, was not political. And yet it has become part of the political not because it wanted to be but because it had weight. Real things have weight. And weight eventually shifts things. HFY Commander Reyes. Reyes read the message twice. Then she went back to work.